So every year at this Economic Outlook Forum, it has become customary for me to pick at people. Over the years, you may recall I have picked at Fred McMurray. He's always a good sport. I think I'm gonna lay off Fred McMurray today. No applause necessary, but thank you anyway. I have, from time to time, picked on Hoppy Cole. Hoppy Cole is always a good sport. He fires back at me because unlike Fred, Hoppy will have an opportunity to be at the podium, so I always have to watch what I say about Hoppy. But my favorite person to pick on, my absolute favorite person to pick on is Dean Becton. And so if you notice from your program, Dean Becton is to do the welcome. I assure you I'm not Dean Becton. Dean Becton has fallen down on his duties to come to the podium and offer a welcome and ask the university president if he would come and do the job that the Dean of the College of Business should be doing. So, evaluation time is coming. Dean Becton, you're one of my favorite targets, and I love to pick at you. Good morning again, everybody. I'm Rodney Bennett, clearly. I'm president of the University of Southern Mississippi. And it is indeed my honor and privilege to welcome each of you to the University of Southern Mississippi's 2022 Economic Outlook Forum. I want to begin by thanking our title sponsor, The First, for their ongoing partnership in presenting this event and for their support of the university as a whole. And I'll pause there just for a second because as you think about our institutional footprint, you don't have to go very far to see the investment that the First has made across the institution, not just with the Economic Outlook Forum, but in our College of Business and Athletics and Student Life and Student Activities and Faculty Affairs. The footprint of this company is throughout the University of Southern Mississippi. And Hoppy, to you and to the leadership team from the First and certainly to the Board of Directors, we thank you for that support. I also would like to extend a very special welcome to our guest presenters this morning, Dr. Chad Miller and Ms. Adrienne Slack, both of whom we will hear from as we move through the program. Now, regardless as to whether you are joining us for the first time or if you have been in attendance each of the past Economic Outlook Forums, I appreciate your engagement. Your participation here today demonstrates your commitment to advancing our economy for the betterment of us all. And the University of Southern Mississippi is proud to be a partner in this important work. Now, most everybody in the room knows that the University of Southern Mississippi was founded in 1910. And since that founding, we have grown to become a comprehensive Research One institution, delivering transformative programs on campuses here in Hattiesburg and along the beautiful Mississippi Gulf Coast, at teaching and research sites across the coast, and through our online programs. Since our inception, USM has remained deeply rooted in the communities that we serve. I'm also pleased that our recent economic impact study demonstrated a 10% increase. So the university now generates an annual economic impact of more than $660 million each year across the state of Mississippi. I'm proud of the expert faculty who are leading our College of Business and Economic Development to demonstrate excellence through national rankings and to prepare our graduates for critical leadership roles in the workplace. I'm excited about the college's newly opened Hatchery Inspiration Lab, which provides students and faculty with dedicated space for innovation and for entrepreneurship. And I cannot wait to learn more about the impact this collaborative space will have on students and on our community. I'm also very proud of the university's work to continue supporting the education, the research, and the economic needs of our coastal community. And if you haven't heard, I'd like to spend just a moment reminding you of the most recent coastal news. The University of Southern Mississippi was named one of 60 national finalists and the only finalist in the state of Mississippi for the United States Economic Development Administration's Build Back Better Challenge, Build Back Better Regional Challenge, which is the primary component in the $1 billion American Restore Plan program. The proposal by the Gulf Blue Initiative Coalition, which is led by the University of Southern Mississippi, drives economic growth through innovation and the knowledge-based blue economy in the coastal Mississippi region. And we are preparing to submit the final phase 2 proposal by March 15th. At the end of phase 2, 20 to 30 regional coalitions will receive between $25 and $100 million each to implement projects that support an industry sector. As you may recall, the Gulf Blue Initiative as a whole is focused on an industry-driven approach to grow the region's blue economy innovation sector and the opportunity to create high-wage jobs in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, areas that we all know as the STEM disciplines, as well as in light manufacturing. Now, I know that many of you have joined us as coalition members or partners supporting this exciting collaborative work. And as always, we appreciate your partnership, and we look forward to our ongoing work to continue investing in our communities, to continue investing in our state and our region together. So as I begin to close, I want to thank each of you again for your commitment to the University of Southern Mississippi and for your commitment to this work. And on behalf of our faculty, our staff, and our alumni all across the world, we thank you for your participation here this morning. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce to the podium Mr. Hoppy Cole, President and CEO for our title sponsor, The First. Please make him feel welcome.
Well, good morning. Gosh, it's great to be back in person. We had this conference last year virtually, and certainly it was a good conference, but it's so much more fun to see all of you in person. As Dr. Bennett said, Dr. Bennett, thank you, you and your staff, and Dr. Beckton, thank you and your staff for all the preparation, hard work that goes into this. I also like to thank Jennifer Trussell. I saw her here. Jennifer, raise your hand. And our marketing department, you guys, great job again. I know there's an awful lot of work behind the scenes to put this together, so thanks so much for what you do for this event. I'd like to recognize some members of our board of directors today. Tom Mitchell from Bay Minette, Alabama. Tom, if you raise your hand or stand. Ted Parker from Hattiesburg. And, you know, what was your name? Oh, you're the guy, I think he said you're a target-rich environment, Fred. Fred McMurray from Hattiesburg. Charles Lightsey from Laurel. And Dr. David Bomboy from Hattiesburg. And Andy Stedelman from Hattiesburg. So welcome, guys. Appreciate y'all being here. I know you didn't have any choice because Charles made you come. But in any event, thanks to this year's speaker, Dr. Miller and Adrian. Appreciate you guys coming in. We look forward to your presentation. A couple people asked me on the way in what we were going to hear today. Any bad news? I've already covered that with Adrian. No bad. We want everybody feeling good when they leave. She said she'd be happy to accommodate that. So this is our 14th year of partnership with Southern Miss, and it's been the conference. It seems like it's grown every year, and every year I think it's formative. At least I know in our business plan. I hope it is in your business plan to hear our presenters' expectations for the year and be able to model what your plans are and what your forecasts are individually for the rest of this coming year. Over this time, this partnership started, Dr. Bennett, in 2008. Your university's changed. Our company has changed a great deal. At that time, we were about $500 million in assets, and we had 9 locations in South Mississippi only. Last year was our 25th year anniversary. We're headed to 26 this year. And in that short time, we've been very blessed and fortunate to grow our company beyond what we ever thought we would be able to accomplish. We currently have 91 locations, and we have over 900 team members in 5 states. We serve Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. We've grown a little over almost $6.1 billion in assets, which makes us the 5th largest bank headquartered in the state of Mississippi. So that's phenomenal growth in the banking business, and we've been blessed to achieve that. Most banks, as a lot of you, there's 80 some odd banks in Mississippi, and the majority of them are 100-year-old charters. And so to rise in a relatively short period of time to be the 5th largest is certainly an accomplishment, one we're very proud of and we're very fortunate to have. That accomplishment has been supported largely by, banks reflect the health of their local markets. And so we've been fortunate to be headquartered here in South Mississippi in Hattiesburg. And the support we've received locally has allowed us to achieve that. But our partnership with Southern Miss has been critical to that growth as well. Not only from the economic impact that you talked about, Dr. Bennett, but also from the talent and the quality of the graduates that your university turns out. A number of our folks have graduated from USM, and it's been a constant source of a constant source of human capital to put to work. And I think it's a real advantage for us. I know it's a real advantage for us to have highly qualified students, right, sort of at ready access to help support that growth. Because fundamentally, our business is built on relationships. And so we talk a lot, you hear a lot about technology and delivery channels and all, and that's true. But at the foundational piece of it, it's about relationships and the people and the folks that you have to garner those relationships. So, again, we're excited, about to be back in person. We thank y'all so much for your support. Hope that this conference will be beneficial and helpful for you today. And if you need any account opening documents, several of our team members are here. They'll get you on the way out. So, thank you. Thanks, Dr. Bennett.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. As Dr. Bennett and Hoppy said, we're so happy that you're here with us in person after we've had to do this event virtually last year. And so it's just great to actually see faces in 3-dimensional properties instead of on a screen. And so we're glad that you're here. Also want to thank Dr. Bennett for always keeping me on my toes. This is a good collection of potential employers, so as you heard, I might be on the job market, so I'll be passing out my card later. I also texted Coach Berry, and I know we got a pretty challenging week coming up for the baseball team, and I said, I know somebody that's got a pretty good curveball if we're running a little short on pitching, so he may be in touch with you soon. So I want to take a moment to thank the First Bank and Hoppy for this long-standing partnership with this event. We're extremely grateful for the support and the partnership that we've enjoyed, and we could not host this annual event without them. So again, thank you for everything that the First Bank does for us. So before we begin the program, I want to offer a little housekeeping information to make sure things run smoothly. We do have 2 outstanding presenters today. Each presenter will make their presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end of each presentation. And so if you could hold your questions until they've finished their presentation, and they will open the floor up for questions. After the first presentation, I'll return to the podium and direct everybody to the lunch buffet. And then once everybody's served, we'll reconvene, and I'll come up and introduce our final speaker, and the presentation will begin. And so with that, I would like to hand it off to Chad Miller. I'm going to introduce him. So Chad is a Professor of Economic Development and the Graduate Coordinator of the Master of Science in Economic Development program at Southern Miss. He works closely with the Trent Lott Center, conducting student-directed community research projects, and has conducted more than $3 million worth of sponsored research. He teaches economic development, organization management, research data analytics, real estate development, and land use planning, and he coordinates the International Economic Development accredited True South Basic Economic Development course. He has extensive private and public sector experience, including managing shipping and global distribution for American companies based in China and Vietnam. He was also an Army officer stationed in the Pacific Rim. He first became involved with economic development as a trade specialist in Maryland. And prior to joining USM, he worked for the Virginia Tech Office of Economic Development. Chad has a PhD from the Virginia Tech Center for Public Administration and Policy, an MBA from Boston University, and a bachelor's degree in government from the College of William and Mary. Will you please help me welcome Dr. Chad Miller?
Let me see if I can switch this over. Had some training, F11. This works. I'm going to use Mentimeter. It's a polling software. So you get your cell phone out. We're going to be collecting your information, get your thoughts. I think it's going to be really valuable. It's really easy. You don't need to download an app or anything. You just go to www.menti.com and put in that number. Or use the QR code, and then when we come up to a polling question, we'll poll, and we'll be able to see the live results of what's going on. I never knew there was little hearts going on at all. So, okay, so menti.com, that code. So let's start off with this. What is your occupational category? Just get a feel for who's in the room. Higher education, finance, real estate, healthcare, public sector, private sector, economic developer, retired, other. Let's look over here. Definitely getting some groupings here of. I'm not sure how many total we have, so let's see. Okay, so you can definitely see there's a group of higher education and finance research and finance, insurance, and real estate. A little less than some of the other sectors. Okay, I want to start out with a gratuitous plug for the Masters of Science Economic Development Program. We are the first and best known economic development program in the nation. We've been around 40 years. Our first graduating class was 40 years ago. There are really not many programs in the nation that specialize in what economic developers actually do. Very well known in the profession. I see a number of alums in the room. So if you're interested in the program, love to have you in. It's appropriate for executives. And also, we're looking for students who want to be graduate assistants. We talked about all those research projects. That's done by students. So I need your help doing these impact studies, feasibility studies, and so forth. So please contact me later if you or somebody you know is interested in going to the field of economic development. So economic developers think of the economy as a leaky bucket. They view it as a leaky bucket, and their job is to keep the bucket full. They're trying to keep money in there and trying to keep it from leaking out. So they're focused on what we call basic sector industries, exporters and so forth, bringing money out of the region, tourism, so forth. I mean, retailers are good because they keep the money circulating around and they can prevent leakages, but really the focus is the export industry. So that's going to be primarily what I talk about in this presentation. So what is economic development? This is our definition: the management of public-private investment collaborations to facilitate sustainable growth in the economy, typically measured by job creation is a big measure we use, increased citizen wealth, a greater tax base, and improved quality of life. So when I'm talking about economic development, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep the bucket full. So a little bit different perspective than some other fields. So sort of cut to the chase, what does the research show as the best approach to economic development? There are all kinds of approaches to economic development, tech-based, tourism-based, and so forth. But the research shows it really comes down to having good local government. You need the good local government in place to make things happen. You need to have the good schools, the safe, the clean streets, the public spaces, and so forth. So we'll talk about some approaches, but that's really the underlying key that comes out, is it all starts with good local government. So let's see, what do you see is the biggest challenge for economic development in Mississippi? Pick two. Might be hard to see. So population trends. We're losing population. Is that a problem? Is availability of workers? Do we not have the skilled and educated workers? Are state and local tax policies and taxes the issue? Is our image the problem, or our attitude? Our industry mix? Do we have problems with our infrastructure? Is it macro forces that are really, so we'll probably hear this afternoon talk about later about inflation and other factors like that. Is that what's really causing the problem? Or is it disparity? You know, economic, rural versus urban, so forth. So it's like we're coming up a lot of, wait till we get to 60. So see, skilled and educated workforce. I think it's interesting the state and local image attitude coming up. Not what I know it's a factor, but not what I guess. I'll go to 65. Okay, so you get a feel for what the people in the room are seeing as what is really creating headwinds for economic development in the state. And particularly skilled workers, our education system, our image and attitude, and so forth. Okay, economic development. When I first got into economic development 25 years ago, we talked about the three-legged stool of economic development. It was all about small business development, which I see the SBDC here, that's what they do, business attraction, and business retention. And it's all built on a base of community development. You need that community development. So that's what we were taught for years, that, and you need this community development to go. And community development is getting a community pulling in the same direction, you know, not pulling against each other. And it's the basic stuff, healthcare, social, tackling poverty, education, and so forth. And again, I talked about the local government, that community development is key. But times are changing a bit. And there's some changes coming on in how economic development is thought about. And so every year, the Area Development, not our Area Development Partnership, the Area Development Magazine, Trade Journal, puts out a survey of corporate executives about what are the key site selection factors. And it's interesting looking at this. So years ago, probably 20 years ago, quality of life didn't even make that list. Now it keeps moving up the list. And it's interesting, it used to be labor costs were the top factor. Now it's labor availability. Companies are beginning to realize they're going to have to pay extra for the skilled laborers they want. Highway accessibility, energy costs, and so forth. So these are generally what companies are looking for when deciding where they want to locate or where they want to expand. So these are key factors we need to address on. And skilled workers, let's key on that. Used to be, you'd say, workers would move to the companies. Nowadays, more and more, companies are moving to where the workers are. Companies are following the workers. So it's really key to have the workers with the right skills and have the population for the companies, because the companies are going to follow you. So we've talked about now changing from that three-legged stool to you still need to do the business development. You still need to do the recruitment, retention, startup, and so forth. But now it's becoming important, this talent development. You need to work in the education system. You need to develop talent. You need to get people coming to your area, recruiting those smart, intelligent people. Return to roots programs, trying to get the kids who left Mississippi coming back to Mississippi, developing and nurturing that talent. And also placemaking. You're building the place where those people want to live. It's a paradigm change for economic development, this new focus on these placemaking, talent development, as long as business development. So just want to put that in your mind, how the field's changing, how the perspective is changing on what we need to do for economic development. So let's start looking at some data for Mississippi. So Mississippi, cost of living is quite low compared to other places. 18% lower than the average in the US. That's good. I mean, it's less expensive to live here. Now, looking at the assessment, also our wages are low. Our average salary is low, which can be good from a company's perspective, lower salary, but also, even with that cost of living, our purchasing power is less than the nation and less than the joining states. So that's something we need to think about. Adjacent states, so this, I put together a list of companies, region of Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Louisiana are the adjacent states listed here. So you can see they also have a low cost of living, not as low as ours, but their wages tend to be higher. So just keep that in mind. Looking at wage increases compared to the state. So our wages are going down. Ours is the darker region down below. And you can see our wages have gone up, but again, they're not going up as much as the adjacent states and not going up as a nation. So you can see it's going up, and then we had a little dip down recently here for some reason in Mississippi in the last quarter. So that's our wage system. They're going up, but not as much as some other places. Number you point out, disparity. There's a Gini coefficient. It's a measure of disparity. So 1 is totally unequal, 0 is totally equal. And this chart kind of exaggerates it a bit, the difference. But you can see Mississippi has more disparity than Tennessee and Alabama in the U.S., but less than New York City. So there is some economic disparity that we clearly see. You drive around, you can see the issues and so forth. So thinking about that wages and so forth, for an economic developer, what range of jobs should be the priority? Because you can focus on trying to get people out of poverty, trying to get the unemployed jobs, but they're probably not going to pay as much. Or do you focus on the local median income, make sure you're better than that or a little better than that? Or do you really focus on the high-paying jobs? You know, should we get those tech jobs that pay a lot and then hope trickle down as a subset and so forth? So I want to put that out to you. So it's kind of a question that economic developers need to think about. Who are, they can only focus so much. What kind of jobs are they going to prioritize? Ideally, they'd probably have a basket of these, but we're just forced for one. Which one do you think? Okay, so most of you are saying, and this is what most the economic developments are focused on, the good paying jobs, above the median income, a few, you know, maybe not the real high paying jobs, they want them, but the real focus is these good quality jobs that are above the median average. Population trends. And I had to double check these numbers a couple times to look at. So looking from the 2010 census to the 2020 census, we've lost 6,000 people, versus the adjacent states have gained 6%, the U.S. 7.5%. And just Texas, I don't know if anybody's been out to Texas recently, it's just amazing the growth out there. So they've added 16% or 4 million more than the Mississippi population in the last 10 years out there. So their population's booming, and we're losing some population. Now, we do have land, you can see, and our median age is lower. So this is what some economic developers are concerned about. You know, if companies are looking for people and we're losing people, how can we address that? But just be aware, it's not across the whole state. Some parts of the states are doing pretty well. DeSoto County, Lamar County, they're gaining jobs. Now you look in the Delta, like Quitman County, 26% of its population left. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about Mississippi overall, grouping it together, but really you should probably look at regions in Mississippi to get a more accurate description. The Delta we were talking before is different than South Mississippi. So just be aware, there are some parts of Mississippi that are gaining population, other parts are losing. Just overall, we're losing population. And you can see some of the areas that are, you know, around the Jackson area, again, the north, the Memphis area, along the coast. A lot of debate on brain drain, why people are leaving and so forth. And so I just want to give one sort of little data point to give some indication of that. United Van Lines does this migration study every year where they track inbound and outbound shipments. So they found in 2020, we had a little more outbound shipments than inbound shipments of people moving out of the state. And you look down the list, and where's the big difference? Well, it's really in the job categories. Why are people leaving Mississippi? For the jobs. And it tend to be the high-end jobs, 45 to 54-year-olds, 150K or more makes up the biggest segment of that. So there are a lot of other factors going into this, but this is just sort of a snapshot of some of the reason that we're losing population, those high-end jobs. Now, we're gaining some people because of that cost of living I talked about earlier. So, how much of a problem do you think demographics, population are for Mississippi? think it's moderate, not a problem at all, a serious problem? And I'm not going to present any solutions to this. I mean, this is presenting the issue, and you guys can discuss the solutions over lunch. Okay. So most people see it as a moderate to serious problem to consider in the state, the population. State remains pretty much a biracial state, black and white. Some of the other races are growing, but it's a pretty small base, but still a biracial state. And you can see it compared to the adjacent state and U.S. Labor force participation rate. This is a contentious number within the economic development community. Our labor participation rate is lower than the other states. Now, there are different ways to measure it. Some are a broader population. Some are the 24-year-olds to 55-year-olds. So depending on the labor set, there's a little difference. But generally, our labor participation rate is lower. That means people who theoretically should be working or working age are not in the working force population. Now, the economic development community questions these numbers. So their question, talk to MDA, so forth, is where are these 46,000 workers that should be out there? They're having trouble, hard to verify this on the ground, these numbers. You look at the numbers, we should have a lot of potential workers out there who just aren't working. But we're having trouble finding those 46,000 workers. Where are they? How can we find them? How can we identify them? So the question to you, the labor force participation rate numbers overstate the potential workforce in Mississippi. Do you think those labor force rate are overstating the available workers out there? Or do you think there are really that many workers out there who just aren't interested for various reasons to be in the workforce? Because again, it ties back, we talked about companies want the workers if they're not there. And again, within the economic developers, we've debated this a lot about what the issue are, where they are, and so forth. So it looks like most are agreeing that it kind of overstates the problem, that 46,000, we don't really have 46,000 people out there waiting for a job and so forth. But just to keep that in mind when you hear that number and hear how low our labor participation rate is, there's some disagreement out there on it. Educational attainment. So we looked at this, and it actually comes out pretty good for Mississippi in the sense that on the higher end, the postgraduate, bachelor's, yeah, we might be a little lower than the U.S., but you look at the associate's degrees, we're doing pretty well. That shows our community college system is putting out people, putting out the education, and that's a lot of what our companies are wanting, people with associate, specialist degrees, and so forth. So that looks pretty good. Now, we are pretty high in just high school graduates, but we're less than our adjacent states. So I think this is a pretty positive indicator of our educational system going forward. This is Jobs EQ has a model in there to say the projection of growth for Mississippi, which they're not projecting much growth for Mississippi, but I think within it, it's interesting to see where they're projecting the educational needs are, and the biggest area is postgraduate degrees is the biggest area, and does tend to be up on the higher end, plus the 2-year degrees in education. So, but the no education is low. So it just shows that our education system needs to keep putting out people and moving forward the postgraduate degrees. Mississippi skills gap. Hopefully you can read this. It's a little, I don't know if people can read. It's sort of a vision test too, throw it in here. Okay, just testing you all the time. So the skills gap, how they get it is they're looking at all the job ads in Mississippi. And they're looking at a sampling of the applications to see what the mismatch is between what the companies are wanting in the job ads and what people have on their resumes and so forth. Now, the top one is credit card machines, which Chris and I were talking about, trying to figure out what that actually means, is being able to swipe a card or some technology. But looking at that, merchandising, bilingual, mathematics are things we're short, but we do have people with the skill set. So looking at the skills we do have, PowerPoint, teacher training, they know Word processing, they know Excel, calculators, and so forth. So we have some skills, just some of the skills that the companies are looking for are not mismatched exactly with these higher skill levels. And this is the same type data, but looking at occupations. What occupations do people have, and what are we looking for? Healthcare. We need more healthcare workers out there, and you can see a lot less healthcare management and business occupation peoples, whereas on the other hand, we have sales, food preparation people, so maybe we need to transitioning over those sales-related occupations, probably retail sales, to business management, business occupation, business finance, and so forth. So again, this is on a state level, so it's pretty broad, but you could look at a regional level to try to zero in on some of these occupation gaps. Here's another one, active job ads compared to last year. So you can see the jobs this year are higher than they were last year, dip down and so forth. So more job ads out there. The top job out there statewide is truck drivers. We have a real truck driver shortage nationally. This is a national issue. Creates supply chains, feeds into inflation and so forth. So if anybody wants to be a truck driver, there are jobs out there. Retail salesperson, we're short here. Registered nurses and stock fillers, probably retail again. So that's statewide. Now looking at bachelor degrees, again, there are more jobs out there looking for people with a bachelor's degree than there were 4 years ago. What are the top jobs? Registered nurses, healthcare again. They're looking for accountants, health managers, software developers, management analysts. Top skills they want Microsoft Excel, Office, PowerPoint, manufacturing, and Word. So you can see some of those, what people are looking, what kind of skills they want when they get out there. So this one to you. Do the skills and occupation gaps match what you are seeing? So what I presented here with the type of jobs, type of skills, and so forth, does this match what you're seeing out there, or are you seeing something very different out there? Okay, so it looks like that's in line with a lot of you are out there in the profession hiring people, seeing some of those same kind of gaps out there. Okay, so mostly agree. Okay, here's a quiz. Rank order by industry concentration in Mississippi. Which one do you think is the first most concentrated in Mississippi? Which one's the last? Let's see how you guys do, and then I'll pop the answer up on the next slide. Any 20 years ago, now we have a significant part. Auto parts was kind of interesting. It didn't go up much, but then we realized that auto parts is really tier 1. So you see metals and other area, the tier 2 suppliers are jumping up. Wood products is about the same. And space tech, we didn't have any, now we have a concentration in space technology. Looking at clusters in Mississippi, what clusters are strong, and this X and Y axis, so the vertical axis is wages, so which ones tend to pay well. The size of the bubble is how many people are in that sector, and the horizontal is the forecast growth rate. So kind of the bubbles are lumped up on each other, but you can see in the upper right-hand corner where we want to be auto-related, utilities, freight, electronics manufacturing, wood products, and healthcare. So those are projected to be the growth clusters moving forward. You've probably all seen in the news about we're going electric vehicles. Huge trend going on in the industry. And auto manufacturing is a huge part of the economy, 6% according to a Mississippi State study. And we have two major manufacturing facilities, Toyota and Nissan, which you can see when they came here. So it was big news for Nissan going to electric vehicles. Really important for the state. So now we need to make sure the supply chain that goes with the electric vehicles are in the state. So auto's very important for the economy, and it looks like we're going on the right track with EVs. Shift share. This gets a little wonky, but so shift share is a measure of competitiveness. It has three components. One is a national growth, assuming that if the economy grows 5%, industry should add 5%. Also, you should grow as much as the industry average. And then that leftover, that remainder, is the regional competitiveness. So if you're growing more than your industry and more than the national average, something special going on in that region of the industry. So looking at Mississippi, you can see we don't have a whole lot of growth overall in jobs. And most of that growth is just attributable to natural growth in the economy. But it's kind of good to look at the loss because our industry mix is not very small. It's most of it because a lot of these companies we have are not as competitive. So that's what kind of driving us down, that we have some of these old companies that haven't retooled and so forth driving that down. So let's look at it for manufacturing sector. You can see more growth. And again, you can see that same kind of trend. So 10% of the loss is due to not having the right industry mix, but that's not bad. 30% because the companies we have are not, or the industries we have are not particularly doing that well compared to the average, and most of it's growth. So there is something with our industry mix that needs to be worked on, and particularly the companies, we need to upgrade them to better compete. So looking at what industries are growing, where are we beating the industry average, looking across plastics and polymers, beverage manufacturing, metal manufacturing, machinery, transportation manufacturing, data processing, and hosting services. Those are the ones where we're doing better than the industry, better than it is expected to do. So I want to kind of wrap up this presentation talking about my industries to follow. Which industries am I excited about Mississippi moving forward in? Forest products, huge industry in Mississippi. I know Chad Newell, ADP, talks about the three pillars here of education, healthcare, military. I think we really need to add wood products because it's a huge part of the area, a huge part of the region. And you look at the growth, the industry nationwide dropped off a cliff in 2008 with the housing crisis. The nation and our competitor states bounced back quicker than we did. We were kind of slow growing back, but recently we've had a lot of good announcements in that industry, not growing up. And heard one of the local companies say, we're not a sawmill, we're a knowledge company making rectangles. Huge trend going on in this industry. You go to some of these sawmills up in the north, there's a guy working in a clean room, driving a machine CNC. So it's an advanced industry. We have a lot of wood products. We have the skills. And then tap it into our polymers, different uses of wood. So I'm very optimistic about wood products being an industry that's going to move Mississippi forward. Blue Tech. President Bennett talked about the Blue Tech, Blue Economy Initiative on the coast. I'm very bullish on this. Applying technology, whether it's aquaculture, sensors, working with the Navy, really a lot of exciting stuff going on the coast. So I'm optimistic about that. Now the trick is, how do we tie that into the rest of the state? How do we build the supply chains that benefit the region with what's going on the coast? So Blue Tech's another area that I'm excited about for the state moving forward. Another area that I'm excited about is the military. 6.5% of the state GDP is military. It's a big presence in the state. And just look at the bottom point. DOD funding for aircraft maintenance. We're the second largest state for aircraft maintenance. You don't really think about defense maintenance, but we do a lot in the state. So, and a lot of states aren't focusing on that, so there are opportunities there. The Mississippi Defense Initiative, we've been working on the defense industry, trying to help the defense economy. So I think there are a lot of opportunities. We're a pro-military state, so a lot of opportunities leveraging our defense sector. So those are three of the big industries I'm very optimistic moving forward. The wild card. I know we've had some false starts in energy, solar panels, biofuels, and so forth, but there are a lot of different opportunities that we might be able to tap into if we get things right. Solar, bioenergy using these wood products we have, hydrogen. Perhaps we become a hydrogen hub. We have some geology that favors that, potential opportunities there. Hydraulic fracturing. Down in the southwest corner of Mississippi, the Tuscaloosa Marine Shale. A huge potential shale play down there. Now the gas oil barrel is what, $113, $110 a barrel. It's way above the break-even point. So that could be a game changer for that area tapping in. There's some administrative policies in there to deal with, but that's another potential, the Tuscaloosa Marine Shale region. Offshore wind tied into that blue tech. So there's some possible game changers for Mississippi in the energy sector that if we do it right, I think we could do it. Now they're hard. I think they're kind of a long shot, but we need to put the resource and decide this is what we want to do. And just sort of an indicator, I mean, we're a huge exporter of petroleum. Chevron refinery, huge amount of petroleum coming in, coming out. So we are in the energy sector. We just need to work on it and see how we can really leverage that. So this is sort of the last bullet cloud. So what industries do you think can most help Mississippi's economic development future? So just type in some words. It'll come up here in a word cloud. I've given you some of what I'm optimistic on, what we're working on. Okay. And the bigger would be more people are bringing up. It's interesting, tourism staying right in the middle, which is true. I mean, it's a lot going on the coast, other areas, opportunities. Okay. Well, I think got the idea, but for the sake of time, I will move on so we can get to our real speaker you're here to hear. So, Chad Miller, here's my contact information. Let you know we're having a baseball tailgate on April 1st. Our students and alumni putting together. Love to have you come by. Great opportunity to network and give my students some jobs. So that's the end of my presentation. I don't know if you want to do questions. Any questions? Threw a lot at you. And actually, as we were going through this, some of it really raised more questions for us than we answered. Some interesting research questions. We were just talking at the table. Some interesting things, because it was a high-level look at these. Well, if no questions, get to our real.
Thank you, Chad. Chad does a tremendous job directing our Masters in Economic Development program and does a lot of great work with his graduate students through the Trent Lott National Center, and we're just pleased that he could be with us today. I will pick on him a little bit. I told him that we really needed him to bring the heat, and I think he got a little too hot, and that was evident by the fire alarm that we experienced. So he follows instructions well, though. So at this time, I would like to introduce our featured speaker. Adrienne Slack is Vice President and Regional Executive of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, New Orleans branch. As part of her role, Adrienne is responsible for the New Orleans branch Board of Directors, Regional Energy Advisory Council, and for providing insight and counsel to the Atlanta Fed's monetary policy process. She also contributes to the Atlanta Fed strategic planning process and advises on regional, community, and economic development matters, including economic mobility and resilience. She joined the Federal Reserve System in 1990 with the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas's Economic Research Department. During her tenure, she served in several national leadership roles, including an assignment at the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. Prior to assuming her current role in 2012, Adrienne was the New Orleans Branch Assistant Vice President and Branch Operations Officer with responsibility for currency, services, law enforcement, and facility and support services. Adrienne received a bachelor's degree in business with an emphasis in economics from Southern Miss and completed the executive development program through the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College. So would you please help me welcome Adrienne Slack.
Well, good afternoon. It is always a wonderful pleasure to be back on campus. And I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about my summer that are relevant to this economic discussion, and also my trips to Hattiesburg that you might find of interest. If some of you have heard me speak last month, you can just keep eating because you've heard some of it before. So let me start with a little story that you'll see woven throughout my presentation today about a vacation I took in July. So on the way home from vacation, car breaks down in the pouring rain in the middle of nowhere, Alabama. And so we get out our electronic device, we order a AAA tow truck, we book a hotel room in Montgomery, we get a rental car at the Montgomery airport. A little bit of a delay, but we're ready to go. Have the car towed to the shop, take a very expensive Uber to the airport to be greeted by an employee that said the following: "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure why our app allows you to book a rental car. We don't have any." And literally all I do all day long, my job is to tell people we don't have any rental cars. Okay, so on the way out of the airport, I looked at my husband and I said, I think we need to rent a U-Haul truck or we're not getting home to New Orleans, anytime soon. So indeed, we booked a U-Haul truck, one of two left in the state of Alabama at the time. We go to our hotel. The next morning, we decide we're hungry. So we don't have our truck yet. We bounce across the highway to the Waffle House, where we're met by a sign that says, "We are only open from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. I'm like, it's a 24-hour Waffle House. Why are they only open? Labor. During the time where we're open, we may decide to switch to to-go at any point in time because of the availability of labor. We'll try to let you finish your meal before we shut down." Okay. The sign goes on. We may not have everything on the menu because of supply chain issues. And then it got serious. You cannot customize your order at the Waffle House. How am I supposed to eat my hash browns without them being scattered and capped and smothered? I mean, come on, that is when you know there's a problem with the economy, when you cannot have your hash browns customized at the Waffle House. We luckily finished our meal without them switching to go or closing at any time. The staff, decided to work through our breakfast hour. We then got a call from the shop the next day, once we were back in New Orleans, that said, so your car's throwing like 40 errors and our staff isn't trained, and so to figure out what's really wrong with your car, we'll have to complete a repair on each one. We're like, what? So we then had to have the car towed back to New Orleans about a week later, where our local mechanic said, yeah, we don't need to look at the 40 errors. I know what part it needs, but it's going to be another 2 weeks before that gets here because it's got to be shipped from somewhere. So that was back in July. So what's changed since then? In comes my multiple trips to Hattiesburg over the past 4 months. And so I have a new economic barometer, and it has nothing to do with hash browns, but it does have to do with breakfast. So I stay at the same hotel in Hattiesburg every time I come. My points are there, so I'm very loyal to it. They know me by sight. And I was met last night with we have really good news for you this time. I'm like, what is that? We're making oatmeal again. I'm like, okay. That was really good news because I have been at this hotel literally 5 times in the past 4 months and have seen them go from a banana and some chocolate milk maybe to, you know, we have something hot, we don't know what decaf coffee is, to all kinds of things. I was here a few weeks ago and they had progressed to some hot prepackaged foods. This time, in addition to the oatmeal, they'd moved the food back into the normal serving area and had decaf coffee. So hopefully that's a sign of improvement for the economy. However, what you all also know, sitting here today, is that the economy has an incredible amount of uncertainty that has been introduced into it since that time, July, or really from a couple of weeks ago. So the first thing I do want to acknowledge is that watching what has gone on in Ukraine with Russia for the past couple of weeks has been extremely difficult for myself, and I'm sure many of you. From a Federal Reserve perspective, first and foremost, human life is what we are thinking about. The reality, though, is this does create, the reality here, not there, the reality here is it does create things the Fed needs to think through and monitor, and quite honestly, we need your help to do that. Because from a Federal Reserve perspective, how the economy responds to what's happening in Ukraine and the sanctions that have been imposed from the US and the EU, we'll be looking to you to see how you respond to those things, to see how your customers respond to those things, to help inform us from a monetary policy perspective. So the other thing I should mention about now is that everything you hear from me today is my opinion and my opinion alone, and not that of the Federal Reserve System or the Federal Open Market Committee. Let's see. All right. While she's working on that, so as you heard, I am the regional executive for the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta in New Orleans, and we do a couple of things there. One is currency and coin distribution. The other is this monetary policy piece that I engage in with contacts across the 4-state area. So my particular piece of the Southern District, the Atlanta District, is Southern Louisiana, Southern Mississippi, so those are about middle state down, coastal counties of Alabama, and the Panhandle of Florida. So when I talk about my contacts, that's who I'm referring to. When we think about the 6th District, though, one of the reasons the 6th District economy is so important, and the opinion of business here is so important, is if you were to take our geographic region that includes Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee, in addition to the other states that I mentioned, we would be the 5th largest economy in the world. That's from a gross domestic product perspective. That's a significant statement. It's a significant amount of an economic engine that we want to be tapped into. When you look at that economic engine by industry, this chart is going to be a little hard to read, but the point of this chart is how big or how close the blue and the green bars are to one another. So those blue bars are the proportion of that industry that make up U.S. gross domestic product. That green bar is the proportion the 6th District contributes to gross domestic product in that industry. So in a sense, as go the businesses in the 6th District, it's a pretty good indicator of where the U.S. economy is and where it's headed. I spend a great deal of my time on the road, in restaurants, doing my economic indicator with what kind of breakfast are they serving me, what sort of area am I in, and what does this tell me about the labor market? Because that's really what it's all about and why I have those experiences. And so why do we ask those questions? If you've heard me speak before, you have heard this quite a bit. We have a dual mandate from Congress. The Fed doesn't just decide what pieces of the economy we want to look at and why we want to look at them for no reason. We look at them from a very specific viewpoint, and that dual mandate from Congress is price stability, or inflation, and maximum employment. So we want stable inflation and maximum employment. The Federal Open Market Committee a number of years ago said, after the financial crisis, said that 2% inflation is what they felt was healthy for the economy to grow at a pace that was appropriate. So that may not be where we are today, is what you all are thinking. And then there's this maximum employment piece. Before the financial crisis, most economists would have said 5%. 5% is what maximum employment is. Well, just prior to COVID, the unemployment rate in the U.S. was about 3.7, 3.9, something to that effect. Far lower than the Federal Reserve thought we could push that unemployment rate. And that was really an exciting thing because we did that in a space where inflation did not fly behind it at an accelerating rate above our 2%. In fact, we struggled to keep inflation at that 2% rate, and we're about as close as we'd ever been right before COVID. So here we are today, and the FOMC, and I have not ever seen a Fed chair come out as strongly as this Fed chair did. At the last Federal Open Market Committee at his press conference, he said, not we're going to, but as close as a Fed chair could come to we're going to be raising interest rates in March. They meet again in 2 weeks. We'll see what they choose to do. But again, the chair yesterday testified before the House of Representatives and indicated again that's still the course that they think will be appropriate. My president, Raphael Bostic, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, has been interviewed recently and said some very similar things. In fact, one of Raphael's recent speeches or interviews indicated that he thought it would be appropriate to raise interest rates multiple times over the course of the year. Again, that's all prefaced with unless something significant happens that means we need to change that course. So price stability, maximum employment, those are the two goals two targets we're trying to meet. And so how do we look at that? This is the economic narrative at the last Federal Open Market Committee meeting. So Omicron was surging, consumers are still buying, labor is in short order, inflation is present in both goods and services, and the Fed's expected to increase rates. Or at least that was the narrative. Or maybe it still is. I would venture to say, in my opinion, that is still the narrative. Those things are still very present today. However, there's one thing missing from this narrative, and that's the uncertainty that's been created from a global political perspective. So what are we thinking about and what are we looking at? The Fed looks at the economy from the same viewpoints, data perspectives, input from business owners such as yourself, community leaders, about how you all are experiencing the economy and how you're responding to it. At the end of last year, growth was pretty darn strong. Fourth quarter, it's estimated gross domestic product in this country was 7%. But there's something interesting to know about that number. And that is, if you look at this chart, the tallest two columns on the chart, aside from the gross domestic product columns, are change in private inventories. Inventories contributed the majority of that 7% back in fourth quarter. The remaining categories on the screen combined added 2%. So what that says to us is it's a supply chain induced behavior that we don't see continuing as we talk to our contacts. So for example, I have a contact that was planning or still is planning in 2021 to build a number of quick service restaurants. Very concerned about their ability to get equipment to put in those restaurants. So they literally rented a warehouse in Houston and pre-ordered all of that equipment for all of the building they will do in 2021. And it's not an insignificant number of buildings. That story replicates itself across companies and across industries, and it's very evident here. So supply chain oriented, businesses can't get supply, so when they do see it out there, they are scooping up whatever they can. I have another contact that's in the plastics industry and basically has told her buyers, just buy it. I will find a place to put it. Don't worry about how much it is. will use it because demand is still that strong. But something we at the Fed are really keeping our eye on because that inventory piece is so strong and contributed so strongly to gross domestic product in the fourth quarter. Followed then by Omicron in first quarter of this year, which did have an impact that is waning now, but one that particularly impacted labor that we'll get to in a minute. So gross domestic product in this country, though, generally, the biggest contributor to that is consumer spending. So what are consumers spending money on? This chart is equalized to fourth quarter of 2019, so think of that as normal. And so when you look at the dotted line on this chart, spending in these categories is either above 2019 levels, if it's above 100, or just barely getting back to 2019 levels, and that would be the services line on the chart. So again, the trend lines on this, from all indications, are that consumers are still spending in all these categories. However, the proportion of that spend, so if you will look at the orange piece of this column or the top parts of this column, about half of that spending reflects higher prices paid for those goods. So while volume quantities are still up, those prices that consumers are paying are also still up. And my contacts are very concerned with how long the consumer can continue to pay the increasing prices that we're experiencing across the board in every industry. How they can pay so far has to do with what's happened to household income as opposed to expenditures. So this particular chart shows personal income, and there are 3 spikes on that personal income line, and that's because that is where the government aid came in during COVID, so those are the 3 packages. And then the green line are wages and salaries. So you can see both of those are up, as is spending. And spending still has an upward trajectory, and the other 2 are slightly declining. But hold there for a minute, because you may be saying, Adrienne, wages are not declining. What are you talking about? That's from a household perspective, not what's happening from a wage employer pay perspective in some places. So let's switch to labor. So labor force participation is also different than it was at the beginning of COVID. So if you look at this chart, it shows the steep drop when the economy shut down back in March of 2020. And then it shows a very sort of tepid march up. And today, we are still not back to the labor force participation that we experienced back in the fourth quarter of 2020 or 2019 or January, February of 2020. So where are all the workers gone? The first thing they've done is they've retired. And there's over 1.5 million folks that have stepped out of the workforce. This chart shows you first the surge in people that retired that were mostly over 70. So these were individuals that could have retired, were working anyway, COVID hit, they took the opportunity to step out. The unretirement collapse, as the economists have named it on the other side. These are people between 65 and 69 with college degrees that basically have come back to some extent, if they feel like it. What I'll call it is, it's normalized. Their rate of participation in the workforce is normalized, as has the rate of retirement has now normalized. That still means, though, there are about 1.5 million people that have not come back. So the lines that you see on this chart are trend lines, not actual volumes. So if you break that out by age, beyond just retirement, and you look at 55 and over, you can see that that retirement piece is still having an impact, or these individuals are out for some other reason. If we also then look, though, at 16 to 24 and 25 to 54, those prime age workers, they're not back to the employment levels that we saw back at the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020 for a variety of reasons. Childcare, family care are two significant reasons that are keeping people out of the workforce. There are not enough child care facilities, and so people are staying home for that reason. The other thing when I talk to my contacts is U.S. citizens saved during COVID. That's a very foreign thing in this country. But they did. Not only did they save, but they're continuing to sit on those nest eggs and use that as a way for perhaps one spouse or partner to work and another to stay home with family members or children. A particular contact in New Orleans that works with a number of individuals doing this, it's a nonprofit, indicated that those savings, though, are waning, and they are unsure how long the individuals that they work with will be able to maintain that position. The issue, though, for those younger folks with children is what do they do with the kids, because the health care is still not available. So something else we are keeping our eye on, and many communities are keeping their eye on. So job openings versus hirings, you can see what's happened to the labor force participation rate has impacted employers' ability to hire. So there are far more job openings, is the point of this chart, than there are of companies actually being able to hire workers. There's actually about 4.5 million job difference in November of 2021 in this particular indicator. You can see it in the skill level. Actually, lower skilled workers, that's recovered to where it was, the number of people in lower skilled jobs, high skilled jobs prior to COVID. Middle skill, still not there, and low skill, while there's been a lot of recovery, and it was in fact the steepest recovery, has stalled quite a bit because there are not enough workers available to fill those positions. And there's more demand for workers now to fill those positions, particularly in the food service industry. Wage growth has popped along with that. Not enough workers. Employers are now trying to attract workers with wages. This is a particular debate that myself and my colleagues in the 6th District, as we hear from our contacts even prior to COVID, have had many hours of discussions with our economists. Typically in an economic model, if employers can't find workers, they raise wages and the workers come. Prior to COVID, almost to a contact, raising wages is not going to find me workers. Because if you recall, we had a labor issue long before COVID ever arrived. Workers want different things now than they did, and they don't want to work in certain types of jobs that they used to work in before. That has been amplified with COVID. In fact, one of our researchers recently published an article. It was picked up by Bloomberg, and it basically said Gen X and millennials are not incented by wages the way that the baby boomers were. In fact, employers would do better to offer things like flex time and remote work to attract Gen X and millennials to their companies. Didn't say wages weren't something that shouldn't also be at play, but it wasn't the only thing that was going to get them back in the space before. Part of the reason I tell that story is the economists listened to us and actually did some research about this so many years later. And when I say listen to us, they listen to what our contacts and employers have been telling us for a number of years. So what does all this mean for the inflation picture that we are facing today? And so the other thing I should mention is most of these charts were put together prior to 2 weeks ago as data releases come out. This one's a particular survey that we do of businesses about their inflation expectations. What's particularly interesting here, and again, this was prior to what's going on in Ukraine, what's particularly interesting here is if you look at the categories at the bottom of this chart, supplier delays, production delays, delays in shipping, most companies think that's going to extend 6 to 12 months. And then you look at the availability of labor. That one's going to be longer than a year. And that really squares also with what my contacts are telling us and what we see demographically happening with retirements, happening with the birth rate, happening with people's willingness to participate in the labor force. Supply chain. Supply chain was also something on that chart that, again, contacts say 6 to 12 months. You can see the pressure, though, that that supply chain issue is putting on inflation, is where I'm going to this. So there's a lot of pressure on the supply chain, and it has translated into the increase in prices I know all of you are feeling in your businesses and your personal lives, both for goods and services. Something a little bit encouraging that we saw back in the end of last year, beginning of this year, was that the producer price index, in particular for unprocessed intermediate demand, so that means things that haven't been fully assembled, the pressure on that, the price index on that, went down significantly. You can see it's very volatile anyway, but it went down pretty significantly. So we were watching that for a sign of, does this mean that there will be some relief on prices, or at least some stabilization of prices? Because if we look at the consumer price index, at least half of the consumer's market basket rose by greater than 5% over the past 5 months. That's significant. That's 40 years kind of significance. All, again, pre the events that we're looking at today. So here's a chart that was done recently, but it's out of date if you watch oil and gas prices at all. So oil and gas prices were pushing higher even prior to what is happening with sanctions and the issue in Russia and Ukraine. As that situation accelerates, these prices have bumped up even further. So I end there, and it's kind of on a don't have a lot of good news, Hoppy, note that, you know, a month ago this speech kind of ended with, there's a lot of pressure, the Fed's paying attention, we're in a position where we've stopped purchasing treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, and the chair and the committee are going to move. And the reality even then is supply chain and labor are causing a lot of what is happening with inflation. So we were really going to have to sit back and pay attention to what impact is monetary policy having on that, because it's not necessarily the cause. Hence, how many times might we need to do this and reposition monetary policy? Today, the uncertainty that's been introduced into the equation, I don't have answers for. What I can tell you is that what I started with, we will be very closely monitoring it, we will be nimble, but we will also be relying on what experiences that you're having, how you're responding to increasing energy prices, labor prices, etc. So with that, I can answer any questions that you might have.
Raising rates to us is kind of good news, Adrian. Some people may not believe that, but.
Well, so when I was asked this question earlier, my response is, well, good news, it depends on your perspective. And typically from the banker's perspective, you're always right there for us to move interest rates. If I'm talking to somebody in real estate, not so much. But I will say, even the real estate folks say it's time. I don't know, you might have a different opinion. I said the real estate folks that I have been talking to also say it's time for us to move. But I was looking at the gentleman behind you to see if he had a different opinion. So I can't speculate. What I can do is direct you to Google Raphael Bostic. It's the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and take a look at some of the comments that he's made in the news recently. The chair also testified, like I said, in front of the House yesterday. He didn't say succinctly, I don't think, but you know what I can say is that uncertainty piece is something that's going to go into the equation at that meeting. Yeah.
And this is going to sound heartless, and I'm anything but heartless, but several of our talking heads have hammered things down, and I even heard it on Bloomberg. There's a universal thought that war is good business. I want your
So, I guess there are a couple of ways to think about that. So, what is happening today with the sanctions that have been put in place? You can look at the commodity markets. And again, depends on your perspective if you think that's good for business or not good for business. For us as consumers, it's impacted things at the gas pump, just as an example. So that's not so good for you and I. When I talk to my contacts, I haven't heard a good for business slant to it. But the other thing I can say, just from purely an economic perspective, is even with a natural disaster. So if you think about something like Hurricane Katrina that had a significant impact on this state, the hurricanes that have had significant impacts across the Gulf Coast over the past 5 years, those things do typically, after they're over, bring in dollars. And they're recovery sorts of dollars. So if you're in those industries, that can be good for those businesses. The human toll, the suffering, the destruction, those are all things that weigh on the Fed heavily and where our thoughts are first. Secondly, our charge from Congress, and I focus a lot on the dual mandate of price stability and full employment, but our allegiance is to the U.S. economy. We do not make monetary policy for anyone else other than the U.S. economy. And so that's why it's so important for us to know from you all how things in the global world are impacting you and your decision making. Because we do look at how exposed might the economy be to what is happening now and what the recovery from that situation might be. And we don't know what that that recovery is going to be. There are any number of potential outcomes and things we probably haven't even thought about. So all we can do at this point in time is acknowledge the uncertainty and make sure that the Fed responds in a way that is best for the U.S. economy. What benefits and things that might have for individual sectors, I think those are just realities of how economies work. There are always people on one side or the other, depending. Like my banker friends that like increasing interest rates. Well, you brought them. I may have given them more ammunition than you. Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about business investment? You continue to see the trend of business investing in new plants, locations.
Yeah, so we saw in 2020 really a stalling that was pretty broad. Not everyone, but a stalling. What's happened throughout 2021, as many of my contacts have come back in with, we are going to restart. My example of the quick service food guy, they've benefited from COVID, first of all, in the consumer. But even those that, aren't necessarily the hot growth like quick service food, companies are in really, really good positions. 2021 was a banner year for almost everybody that I talked to. Both from a volume demand and a revenue perspective. And some of that is being plowed back into building new locations, trying to purchase equipment. Where I'm headed with this, because there is a but, is the supply chain is preventing quite a bit of that. So while companies might have had plans to do these things, they're really stretching and extending out. We've had our ear to the ground pretty closely with our construction contacts because they are very concerned about the continuing escalation of commodity, particularly in steel and things. It's leveled off recently, but there's been a little bit of rescoping of jobs, but nothing that's dropped off. I haven't talked to one of my major construction contacts that's actually had projects drop completely in the latter half of 21. Some that are, though, are very concerned that the numbers are no longer viable, particularly in some markets with multifamily housing. But I say all that with a heavy sort of pause because of where we are. Meaning, contacts were already very concerned with inflation and the ability of their customers to keep taking those numbers on, their ability to continue to pass price, their ability to continue to raise wages. You couple that with the last chart I showed with energy prices. Crude and natural gas are inputs to everything. And so that could have some implications. We don't know, but those are the things that we're watching, that uncertainty. A lot of that gets into how long does it go on? What does it really touch? It's too soon to tell. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your attention, and if any of you out there start experiencing something you think we need to know about, please reach out and give me a buzz. I'd be happy to chat with you. Come back to Hattiesburg and see if they're serving something besides oatmeal. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who gutted it out with us today. We had a couple of unexpected kinks thrown into the mix, but we made it through it. So I know that I got a lot from this, a lot to think about, and I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful too. So Adrian and Chad, we have some gifts for you as tokens of our appreciation for sharing your expertise and time with us today. So please meet us down here once we dismiss, and I'm sure we'll like to have some photo opportunities with Hoppy and Dr. Bennett and the presenters. So again, thanks to the First Bank for your continued support of this event and the support of the College of Business and Economic Development. And again, thank you for being here. This was a great time to get together. We look forward to doing this every year. And as Hoppy said, it tends to get better each year, and this was no exception. And we look forward to future events. And so that concludes our Economic Outlook Forum for this year. And I just hope that everybody has a safe trip home, and hope to see you again next year. Thanks a lot.